So what's the quickest way to shoot a time-lapse in your Sony mirrorless camera? Now to be fair, there's technically a few ways you can accomplish this, though not all options might be available to all different camera models. To start, Sony's interval shooting mode actually offers a wide range of flexibility with picking long exposure times and longer durations between shots, say anywhere from 3 to 5 and more seconds between each frame captured. However, the largest issue with interval shooting is the fact that you're generally capturing a group of pictures, and so you will not have a ready-to-go video of your time-lapse until you take that and do some process for it in post to assemble it. Now, Sony also does have a time-lapse app that was part of this PlayMemories app ecosystem that existed for a time. However, this has essentially become a defunct offering within the past 3 to 4 years. Just for a quick example, my first camera was a Sony a6500, which did include this option. However, my Sony a7 III, which came out in 2018, does not have the ability to use the PlayMemories apps, nor does my Sony a7S III that just recently came out, so this likely won't be an option available to you if you purchased a newer Sony camera somewhere within the past 3 to 4 years. However, many Sony cameras do have a slow and quick, or S&Q mode, that you can use, among other things, to shoot a time-lapse with, that with just a couple of settings changes will give you a full video that is a time-lapse right out of your camera without any additional work. Now, I'll walk through how to do this briefly with my Sony a7S III. It is worth noting that you can do this with just about any Sony mirrorless camera that has S&Q mode, though the menu locations and the names of things might slightly vary. So, let's describe how to do this. Alright, so to go through how to set up a time-lapse in S&Q mode, you would first go into the menu system, and then scroll down to the shooting mode. Now once you're there, you can go over to image quality, and scroll right over to, as you see, S&Q settings. Now once you go to that, you'll notice a few different things you can select. First will be the recording frame rate, and so this will generally be whatever frame rate your timeline that you're making this video for is intended to be in, right? I typically shoot in 24 frames per second, and so I want this time-lapse to be in 24 frames per second, so we'll leave it at that, but you can choose other frame rates depending on what your choice is. Now the S&Q frame rate will actually dictate the number of frames per second that S&Q mode will capture at a given point in time. Now, as you'll see, this can capture all the way up through the range of the different frame rates that, in this case, the a7S III can shoot, but because we're trying to get a time-lapse, I'm going to go as slow and for as few frames to capture as possible to give that kind of unique effect we often see with time-lapses. In this case, the lowest I can go is 1 frames per second, so we'll stick with that. Now, because the a7S III has the ability to shoot in different codecs, and also thus different bit rates and chroma subsampling modes, I can choose between 4208-bit at a given bit rate versus 422 10-bit. I will keep it at the highest bit rate and chroma subsampling that I can, just because I have that option to with this camera. And so once we've done that, it really is just a matter of flipping your camera into S&Q mode using the mode dial, and you should have a time-lapse that you're ready to record. Now, of course, you may want to expose your shot before you just immediately press record. I'll talk about that in a second. And as I mentioned before, you will have different looking menus and locations for where you would find this depending on the Sony camera model that you have. But by and large, it's really the same settings and same process on most of Sony's cameras that have S&Q mode available to you. Now, I'll mention a few points you'll want to consider when you're shooting time-lapses that could certainly become important, depending on a few different factors. For one, you'll likely want to close your aperture down or increase it to a large number, however you want to think of that, right? Whether that's f12 or f16, something that your lens will support that will allow you to have the full range of what you're trying to capture within depth of field, and not have too shallow depth of field that doesn't show everything. Additionally, you might also want to adjust your shutter speed so that you have the appropriate amount of motion blur you're looking for in your time-lapse. What I've noticed for myself is generally whatever I'm using for my regular video settings, say if that's 1/50th with a 24 frames per second shooting mode, will be more than enough adequate motion blur for a time-lapse, even if I'm shooting in 1 frame per second in S&Q mode. But your results may vary. You'll also likely want to set a couple of values manually just to ensure things don't get a bit weird as you're shooting for a long duration. For one, you'll likely want to switch that into manual focus and just fixate on some object within the shot, just so you don't have any unpredictable focus hunting going on as your image changes. And secondly, you'll likely also want to do the same and set a fixed white balance value, just to ensure as the sky and other parts of your scene and lighting change, that this doesn't shift on you as well. One other point to maybe mention is the fact that S&Q mode does not record audio, More than likely, you wouldn't be concerned about this if you're shooting a time-lapse anyway, but something to keep in mind for future uses with S&Q mode if you do intend to use it for other things. And so, that's how to shoot a time-lapse quickly with your Sony mirrorless camera. If this video's been of any help, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. I'm definitely going to be doing some more little tutorials and things with my A7S III as I dig into it more and shoot some more gigs with it. That is all I have to say, so thanks for watching.